She is a liability. Pull her today. Walker seized the evaluation folder and hurled it directly at the wall. Pages detonated across the room like shrapnel. He grabbed the nearest chair, slammed it sideways into the metal desk. The impact rang through the entire room like a gunshot. 3 seconds of hesitation. He screamed, his fingers stabbing the air toward Davis. In a real scenario, that is a body. Her body. My body. Everyone standing next to her. His voice cracked with raw fury. She does not belong here. She has never belonged here. Every day she stays in this program, she is a danger to every single one of us. The room was completely silent. Nobody argued. Nobody defended her. Maya Reynolds stood just outside that door, and she heard every word. If this story moves you the way it moved us, please subscribe to our channel and follow Maya's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning Maya Reynolds arrived at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for her Advanced Combat Readiness Evaluation, she carried 1 duffel bag, 1 set of orders, and 10 years of memories that never left her alone. She was 28 years old. She had been a Navy SEAL operator for 6 of those years. She had completed classified missions in environments most Americans would never know existed. She had operated in temperatures that cracked equipment, in terrain that broke lesser soldiers, in situations where hesitation was the same as death. She had brought teammates home. She had made decisions under pressure that her commanders later cited in training briefs as examples of exceptional tactical judgment. She had a record that spoke for itself. At least that was what she believed when she stepped off the transport vehicle at 0500 and felt the California desert air settle against her skin. She believed the record would speak for her. She was wrong. The other operators at the facility barely looked at her when she arrived. That wasn't unusual. SEAL culture was never about warm welcomes. You earned your place every single morning. Nobody gave you anything. Nobody shook your hand and told you that you belonged. You showed them, or you didn't. Maya knew that. She had lived by that code since the first day she entered the program. She had bled by it, lost sleep by it, pushed herself past the edge of what her body believed was possible, and then kept going. She didn't need anyone to look at her when she arrived. She needed a bunk, a mission brief, and a chance. She got the bunk. The brief came the following morning. The chance, that was the part that would take longer than she expected. The evaluation program was structured over 8 weeks. It was designed to assess not just physical readiness, but decision-making under compound stress, communication under fire, leadership, cohesion, and tactical adaptability. The instructors were former senior operators. The exercises were built to simulate real-world threat environments with as much fidelity as a training facility could achieve. In short, it was not designed to be survived. It was designed to reveal exactly who you were when everything was taken away from you. Maya understood that going in. What she didn't understand, couldn't have understood not yet, was how much she had already been taken from before she set foot on the evaluation field. Day 1 started cleanly enough. She completed the morning physical assessment without incident. Her times were solid, not the fastest in the group, but well within acceptable range for someone her age and experience level. She ate in the mess hall alone, which wasn't unusual. She reviewed her brief quietly. She was methodical. She was focused. And then the first live exercise began. It was a standard reconnaissance simulation. Mark your entry point. Identify 3 target locations. Establish communication with your contact element. Extract without detection. Maya had done versions of this exercise more times than she could count. She stepped into the scenario and immediately felt something shift inside her chest. It was small at first, a tightening, a slight elevation in her heart rate that she recognized but couldn't immediately explain. She had trained to manage her physiological responses to stress. She had practiced controlled breathing under fire. She knew what adrenaline felt like, and she knew how to work with it instead of against it. But this was different. This wasn't adrenaline. This was something older. She pushed through it. She completed the exercise. She made no critical errors. But the instructors noted her reaction time on 2 specific checkpoints, 0.3 of a second slower than her recorded baseline. In the SEAL world, 0.3 of a second is not insignificant. Day 3 brought close-quarter combat drills. She moved through the first sequence well. Her positioning was correct. Her footwork was precise. Her transitions between cover points showed the kind of muscle memory that only came from years of actual field application. Then her partner stepped into her space too quickly. It was a training movement, normal, scripted. She had seen it 100 times, but her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She stopped. Just for a moment, half a second, maybe less. But the instructor saw it. Reynolds, reset. She reset. She completed the drill. She said nothing. That evening alone in her bunk, while the rest of the facility settled into whatever version of quiet a SEAL training compound ever achieved, she stared at the ceiling and asked herself the same question she had been asking for 4 months. What is wrong with you? She didn't have an answer. That was the part that frightened her most. By the end of the first week, the pattern had established itself clearly enough that people were starting to talk. Not loudly, not directly. SEAL culture had certain rules about how criticism was expressed, and open mockery wasn't one of them. But there were looks. There were conversations that stopped when she walked into a room. There were small groupings at the edge of the training field where eyes moved toward her and voices dropped low. Maya noticed all of it. She had always been good at reading a room. It was one of her strongest operational skills, the ability to absorb environmental information quickly and accurately, to sense shifts in group dynamics before they became visible. Her commanders had noted it specifically in her evaluations. Exceptional situational awareness, one report read, anticipates threat indicators before formal confirmation. That same skill that had kept her alive in the field now delivered a clear assessment of the situation around her. People had already decided. She was finished. Lieutenant Ethan Walker was the first person to say it out loud to her face. I was 24 years old. He had been through the program 18 months earlier and had graduated near the top of his evaluation class. He was smart, physically elite, and absolutely convinced that his performance represented the standard by which all performance should be measured. He found her in the equipment bay on the morning of day 9. Reynolds, he said, not looking up from the vest he was adjusting. I've been watching your numbers. I know, Maya said, they're bad. I know that too. He set down the vest and looked at her directly. He had the kind of steady gaze that came from never having genuinely doubted himself. Maya had seen it before. It wasn't arrogance exactly. It was something more dangerous than arrogance. It was certainty without experience. This program doesn't carry passengers, he said. You know that. I'm not here to be carried. Then I don't know what you're here for, Walker said. Because what I've seen this week doesn't look like a decorated operator. It looks like someone who maybe had a few good deployments and is running on the credit from them. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Walker held her gaze, waiting for her to argue, waiting for her to defend herself. She didn't. I appreciate your input, she said finally, and she walked away. Walker watched her go. He turned back to his vest, shook his head slightly, and said to no one in particular, she doesn't even push back. That's how you know. She didn't push back. That was what everyone kept saying. It became part of the narrative that assembled itself around her in the absence of any story she chose to tell. Because Maya didn't explain herself. She didn't seek sympathy. She didn't corner an instructor after hours and plead her case. She didn't sit down with her peers over coffee and talk about what she was carrying. She arrived early, she worked, she absorbed the criticism, she stayed late, and she failed again the next morning. Not catastrophically, not in the kind of spectacular fashion that would have ended her evaluation immediately, but consistently, incrementally, in ways that added up to a portrait of someone whose edge had dulled, whose instincts had softened, whose confidence had been quietly hollowed out somewhere between her last deployment and this training field. The instructors were patient at first. The senior evaluators had seen operators go through rough patches. Combat changed people. The transition back to training environments after intense field work wasn't always smooth. They gave her room, but patience had a duration. By the end of week 2, the conversations in the instructor room were no longer about how to support Maya Reynolds. They were about when to recommend her removal. Senior Chief Instructor Davis pulled her aside after a particularly difficult water extraction drill. He was a man who had seen 30 years of SEAL training and had the weathered, precise quality of someone who had measured thousands of people against the hardest standards imaginable. He was not unkind. He was simply honest in the way that people are honest when they've stopped having the energy to soften truth. Reynolds, he said, his voice low enough that it didn't carry to the rest of the group. I've read your service jacket. Sir, what's in that jacket is impressive, genuinely. The kind of record that makes instructors pay attention. Thank you, Senior Chief. But I have to be direct with you. He paused, choosing his words with the careful economy of a man who never used more than he needed. Whatever built that record, the instincts, the decisiveness, the situational reading that your commanding officers described, I'm not seeing it here. And that concerns me. I understand. Do you? He studied her face because what concerns me more than your performance is that you don't seem surprised by it. Most operators who are struggling at least look surprised. You look like you expected this. Maya said nothing for a moment. The California sun pressed down on the training field around them. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Walker running a communication drill with two of the other candidates. I'm working through something, she said finally. We all work through things, Davis replied. The question is whether you can do it here in this program without putting your team at risk. She met his eyes directly. I can. He studied her for another moment. Then he nodded once. Then I suggest you find a way to show me, he said, because the evaluation board meets at the end of week 4, and right now I cannot make a case for keeping you in the program. He walked away. Maya stood in the heat and let that land, end of week 4. She had 12 days. That night, she called her older sister from a payphone near the mess hall entrance. Caroline Reynolds was 42 years old, a high school history teacher in Virginia, and the only person on earth who had known Maya since before she was a warrior. Caroline answered on the second ring the way she always answered Maya's calls, quickly, like she'd been waiting. Hey, soldier, Caroline said. Hey. A pause. Caroline had learned over the years how to read Maya's silences. Talk to me, Caroline said. I'm struggling, Maya said. It cost her something to say it, even to Caroline, even in the dark alone with nobody watching. Struggling how? The training, my performance. I'm not where I need to be. Are you surprised? Maya frowned at the receiver. What? I said, are you surprised because I'm not? Maya, you came back from that last deployment and you sat in my kitchen for 3 days and you barely slept and you barely ate, and every time a car backfired on the street, you were on your feet before you knew you were moving. I watched you. You told me you were fine. I was fine. You were not fine. You were functioning. There's a difference. Maya pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. I don't know how to be different, she said. I know how to push through. That's what I've always done. I push through. Yeah, Caroline said. But what happens when you've been pushing so long, you can't remember what you're pushing toward? Maya didn't answer. You were always the toughest person I ever knew. Caroline said, her voice softer now. But tough isn't the same as healed. You know that. I don't have the luxury of healed right now. Then at least be honest about what's happening to you. Stop pretending it's tactical. Stop analyzing it like a mission. Something hurt you, Maya. Something real. And it's still in there. After she hung up, Maya stood outside in the dark for a long time. She didn't have answers. But something about speaking it out loud, 3 words, I am struggling, had shifted a weight she hadn't even known she was holding in one place. Day 15 brought the hostage rescue simulation. It was one of the most complex exercises in the evaluation program. Multiple entry points, dynamic threat positioning, a principle with time-sensitive movement requirements, communication on 3 simultaneous channels. Every decision had a cascading consequence, and the instructors watched everything. Maya's team was Bravo Element. Walker was the team lead. Maya was assigned as secondary tactical coordinator, the role responsible for monitoring the overall mission architecture, while Walker drove the primary assault. It should have been a role that suited her strengths perfectly. Her ability to read the whole picture, to track multiple elements simultaneously, to anticipate movements before they materialize. These were precisely the skills the secondary coordinator position required. For the first 12 minutes, she executed cleanly. She tracked the threat positions. She communicated adjustments to the perimeter element. She identified a flanking gap that Walker had missed and called a correction before it became a problem. Walker, to his credit, accepted the call without a hesitation. Then, at minute 14, the scenario shifted. A simulated secondary threat appeared from an unexpected vector. It wasn't in the original brief. It was an injection, a deliberate test of adaptability that the instructors inserted into exercises to see how teams responded to conditions that exceeded their planning. Maya saw it first. She saw it, processed it, and then something happened that she couldn't fully explain afterward, Not to herself, not to anyone. She hesitated. Not long, 2 seconds, maybe 3. But in a simulated hostage environment, 2 seconds was a lifetime. Walker reacted independently, called his own adjustment, and the team adapted. They completed this mission. They extracted the principal. But the scoring matrix reflected the hesitation. Bravo element finished 4 points below minimum threshold. Walker said nothing directly to her during the debrief. He didn't have to. The evaluators documented the hesitation point in clinical measured language that somehow felt sharper than any accusation. Secondary coordinator demonstrated delayed response at injection point delta, duration approximately 2.8 seconds, contributed to team scoring deficit. Maya sat through the debrief with her hands flat on the table. Afterward, when the room was emptying, Walker stopped beside her chair. "I need to say something," he said. "Say it. I don't think you should be here anymore." His voice was not angry. That almost made it worse. It was considered, measured, like he had thought it through and arrived at a conclusion he genuinely believed was responsible. "I know that's harsh, but people depend on their team. And if you can't make a call when a call has to be made, that's not a training problem. That's a safety problem." "Are you done?" Maya asked. "I'm not trying to be cruel." "I know you're not," she said. "That's not the same as being right." She stood up, picked up her debrief folder, and walked out. Behind her, she heard Walker say to another evaluator, 2.8 seconds. In a real scenario, that's a body." She kept walking. She was in the equipment room alone at 2200 hours when the door opened. She didn't look up. She assumed it was a maintenance check. She continued cleaning and reassembling the rifle components laid out in front of her, her hands moving through the process with the automatic precision that 12 years of ingrained muscle memory produced. "You do that like someone who's been doing it since before it was a habit," a voice said. She looked up. Commander Nathan Cole was standing in the doorway. She recognized him. She had seen him on the observation platform twice during the training exercises, a tall, lean man in his mid-40s with the quiet, self-contained quality of someone who had nothing left to prove and therefore no reason to perform. Senior SEAL officer, observing capacity. She had filed him away as oversight and thought nothing more of it. She started to rise. "Stay," he said. "Don't stop on my account." He walked to the bench across from her and sat down with the easy, unhurried movement of someone comfortable in every environment they'd ever entered. Maya continued with the rifle components. Cole watched her hands. "Left index compensates before the right," he said. "When you're fatigued, most people don't notice it. You've been doing it your whole career, probably." Maya paused for exactly half a second. Then she continued. "You've seen my jacket," she said. "I've seen more than your jacket," Cole replied. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks. And I think Lieutenant Walker is asking all the wrong questions." He said it simply without drama, the way someone states a fact they are absolutely certain of. "He wants to know whether you can keep up." "That's the wrong thing to want to know." "What's the right thing to want to know?" Cole leaned forward slightly. "The right thing to want to know," he said, "is why one of the most experienced operators in this program is making the specific mistakes you're making." Maya looked at him steadily. "Everyone else has decided they already know why," she said. "Everyone else is wrong." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not loaded. Just the silence of two people who had both spent time in places where words were expensive and chosen carefully. "What do you think is happening?" Maya asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. "I think you came back from something that hasn't finished happening yet," he said. "And I think you've been trying to outperform it instead of outlast it. And I think your body and your brain have been having an argument ever since, and the training environment is where that argument shows up." Maya set down the component she was holding. She looked at the wall for a moment, then she looked back at him. "My last deployment," she said, "something went wrong. I know. The mission succeeded. I know that too. But I made a call that I've been second-guessing for 4 months. And every time I'm in a scenario where the pressure spikes past a certain point, some part of me goes back there. Just for a second. 2 seconds. 3. She paused. "And in this program, 2 seconds is everything." Cole nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "On your last deployment, when you made that call, the one you've been second-guessing, did it save lives?" She was quiet. "Yes," she said finally. "Did you know in that moment that it was the right call?" Another pause. Yes. Then this problem isn't your judgment, Cole said. The problem is that you stopped trusting it. Maya looked at him. For the first time in 4 months, she felt something shift that wasn't fear. It wasn't confidence yet. It wasn't certainty. But it was the smallest, most fragile beginning of the possibility of believing that she wasn't actually broken. The evaluation board meets in 12 days, she said. I know, Cohen replied. They're going to recommend removal. Probably. What do you recommend? Cole stood up. He looked at her the way very few people had looked at her in the past 4 months, not with pity, not with impatience, not with the resigned expression of someone performing the duty of fairness before an inevitable conclusion. He looked at her like she was still standing. I recommend, he said, that you stop trying to become the person you were before and start trusting the person you are right now. He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused without turning around. You're not finished, Reynolds, he said. You've just been carrying this alone for too long. He left. Maya sat in the equipment room for a long time after the door closed. Outside, Coronado was settling into its strange desert and sea nighttime quiet. The base had the particular kind of silence that only military installations achieve, not peaceful exactly, but purposeful. A silence that contained within it the understanding that tomorrow would require something of everyone who slept inside it. She looked at the rifle components laid out in front of her. She picked up where she left off. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady. She was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, that had always meant something. The next morning, Walker was already at the firing range when she arrived. He turned when he heard her boots on the gravel, and something crossed his face, not cruelty, but the flicker of a man who had made up his mind and was not entirely comfortable looking at the evidence that his conclusions might be incomplete. Reynolds, he said. Walker, she said. She moved to the lane beside him, checked her equipment, and raised her weapon. Walker watched her settle into position. I heard Cole was in the equipment bay last night, he said. He was, she said. What did he want? To talk. Walker lowered his own weapon, slightly turning toward her. About you. About some things, she said, and then she fired. The first round hit center mass, the second hit center mass, the third, fourth, and fifth center mass, center mass, center mass. Walker stared at the target downrange. He didn't say anything. She lowered her weapon, cleared it with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and turned to look at him. I'm not finished, she said. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't defensive. It was simply a statement of fact delivered by a woman who had spent 4 months forgetting that fact and was in the early, uncertain, genuine process of remembering it. Walker looked at the target again. He looked at her. He didn't answer. But for the first time since they had been in the same program together, he didn't look certain. 11 days remained before the evaluation board. 11 days before someone else would decide whether Maya Reynolds still had a place in the world she had spent 12 years building, bleeding for, and refusing to leave. She had gone into this program believing her record would speak for her. She was beginning to understand that no record speaks for you when you've stopped speaking for yourself. And she was beginning, slowly and perfectly, with the particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage at all, from the outside, to find her voice again. Not the voice that proved things to other people. The voice that told the truth to herself. The voice that said something happened to you and it was real and you are still here. And those two things can both be true at the same time. The voice that Commander Nathan Cole had somehow heard across a crowded training field in a 2-week observation window. The voice that Lieutenant Ethan Walker had never bothered to listen for. The voice that 11 days from now would have exactly one chance to speak loudly enough to matter. Maya Reynolds had been failing every combat test. She had been failing them because she was fighting 2 wars simultaneously. One on the evaluation field, one inside her own mind, and for 4 months the second war had been winning. But 11 days remained, and she was not finished yet. She walked away from that door the same way she had walked away from every hard thing in her life, without running, without breaking. But something had changed inside her chest, and she knew it, even if she couldn't name it yet. Walker's voice was still in her ears. Not the words exactly, but the tone, the absolute certainty of it. The way a man speaks when he has already written someone off and is simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm what he decided weeks ago. She had heard that tone before, not directed at her, directed at other operators who had come through programs ahead of her people. She had watched quietly absorb that particular kind of dismissal and either fold under it or find something inside themselves strong enough to push back. She had always assumed, without examining the assumption too carefully, that she would be the second kind of person. Now she wasn't sure. She went to the one place on the base where nobody ever looked for anyone, the far end of the equipment storage corridor, a narrow concrete passage that smelled like industrial solvent and gun oil, where the overhead lighting buzzed slightly, and the sound of the training field became a distant pressure rather than an immediate one. She sat on an equipment crate and put her hands on her knees and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The way she had been taught years ago, when a senior instructor told her that the breath was the fastest way to tell the truth about the state of your nervous system. Her breath was unsteady. She made herself sit with that. The evaluation board met in 11 days. Davis had told her as much in language that was careful and professional and could not have been clearer if he had simply said, "You are running out of time." Walker had just made it worse by going from careful professional language to screaming and throwing furniture, which meant the conversation around her had officially moved from concern to crisis. She thought about Commander Cole. She thought about what he had said the night before, sitting across from her in the equipment bay with his elbows on his knees and his voice completely unhurried, like a man who had been given all the time in the world and had chosen to spend some of it here with her. "You've been trying to outperform it instead of outlast it." She turned that sentence over in her mind, the way she turned equipment over in her hands during maintenance, looking for the working parts, looking for what held the whole thing together. Outperform it. That was exactly what she had been doing. Every morning since she came back from that last deployment, she had walked onto whatever field, whatever evaluation platform, whatever operational environment she was placed in, and she had tried to perform her way past what was living inside her. She had tried to run fast enough and shoot straight enough and make decisions sharp enough that the thing she was carrying would simply fall behind and eventually stop following. It hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten faster. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. 11 days. She stood up, squared her shoulders, and walked back toward the training field. She had work to do. The thing living inside her was just going to have to come along for the ride. Senior Chief Davis was crossing the yard when she intercepted him. He saw her coming and slowed, which told her he knew what she wanted to talk about. "Sir," she said. "Reynolds." "I know what Walker said in that room." Davis studied her face for a moment. He had the quality of a man who had learned to read people the hard way through consequence, and what he read in her face right now seemed to give him pause. "Walker is entitled to his assessment," Davis said carefully. "Walker is 24 years old, and he's been in 2 training programs," Maya replied. Her voice was level. She was not angry. She was simply precise, the way she was precise when a situation required accuracy over emotion. "His assessment is based on 6 weeks of observation. My record is based on 6 years of operational service." "I'm aware of your record." "Then you're also aware that what you've seen in this program is not representative of that record." Davis crossed his arms. "What I'm aware of is that, representative or not, what I've seen in this program is what I have to evaluate you on. That's how evaluations work." "I understand that," Maya said. "I'm not asking you to ignore what you've seen. I'm asking you to give me the full 8 weeks before the board decides anything. What Walker is pushing for is a premature recommendation." Davis was quiet for a long moment. The base moved around them. Other operators crossing the yard, a transport vehicle running along the perimeter, the distant rhythmic sound of someone on the pull-up bars near the barracks. The ordinary machinery of a training day that had no idea what was being decided in this small, quiet conversation between 2 people standing on a patch of gravel. "You've got 11 days, Davis said finally. "The board meets when the board meets. Nothing I can do about Walker's opinions between now and then. What I can do is make sure the board sees the complete picture." He paused. "But Reynolds, I'm going to say something to you that I need you to hear. Sir, whatever you're carrying, you need to find a way to put it down. Not permanently, not forever, just long enough to do your job." His voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man who had watched good people fall short of themselves for reasons that had nothing to do with their ability. "Because right now you're letting it stand between you and every evaluation point, and I can't protect you from that. Nobody can." She held his gaze. "I hear you, Senior Chief." He nodded once like a period at the end of a sentence and walked away. She stood where she was. Put it down, he said, like it was a piece of equipment, like she could unstrap it, set it on the bench, walk away from it, come back for it later. She understood what he meant. She even agreed with the logic of it abstractly, the way you agree with the logic of something while standing in the middle of the experience that makes the logic almost impossible to apply. The problem was that she had tried. She had been trying for 4 months, and the thing she was carrying had no straps. It didn't sit on her back or hang from her vest or weigh down her hands. It sat in the space between stimulus and response. That half-second delay, that 2-second hesitation, that moment when her nervous system flashed back to a dark room on the other side of the world, and her body forgot briefly but catastrophically that she was standing on a training field in California and not in the middle of the worst night of her operational life. That was what nobody could see from the observation platform. That was what Walker's evaluation metrics couldn't capture. That was what the scoring matrix measured as a deficit but couldn't explain. She went to the firing range. She spent 2 hours there alone, which was unusual enough that the range safety officer checked on her twice. She wasn't working on accuracy. Her accuracy had never been the problem. She was working on something smaller and more specific the moment just before the trigger. Pull the space between decision and action, the exact neurological intersection where her brain had been inserting a memory that didn't belong there. She was trying to teach herself to notice the intrusion without becoming it. She fired and fired and fired. The range safety officer, a young petty officer named Cho, who had the good judgment not to ask questions that weren't his to ask, brought her a water bottle around the 90-minute mark and set it on the bench beside her without a word. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and walked back to his post. Small kindnesses, she thought. The kind that happened in plain sight and nobody wrote reports about. She kept working. By the time she left the range, something had shifted, not fixed, not solved, but shifted. Like a joint that had been held wrong for too long and had just been moved into a slightly better position. Still painful, but less stuck. She was walking back toward the barracks when she almost collided with Walker. He was coming the other direction, head down, reading something on a clipboard. He looked up at the last second and they both stopped. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Walker looked the way people look when they've said something they believed in the heat of saying it and have had a few hours to sit with the sound of their own voice. Not apologetic, not exactly, but slightly less certain than he'd been that morning. "Reynolds," he said. "Walker." He looked at the range behind her, then back at her face. "You've been out there all afternoon." "Yes." "Working on what?" She considered him for a moment. The young man who had thrown a chair and called her a liability. The young man who had never sat in the kind of silence that followed a mission that went sideways, who had never lain awake at 3 a.m, running calculations on a decision that couldn't be unmade, who measured excellence in evaluation scores, in reaction times, and had not yet been given a reason to understand that some of the best operators he would ever encounter in his career would carry invisible damage that his metrics would never capture. "Working on something you wouldn't understand yet," she said. Not cruelly, simply honestly. Walker's jaw tightened. "That's a convenient answer." "It's the true one," she said. "Give it time. You'll understand it eventually." She walked past him. He turned and watched her go, and she felt his eyes on her back, and she didn't turn around. That night, Commander Cole found her at the same bench in the equipment bay. She suspected this was not a coincidence. She had the impression that Nathan Cole moved through this base with a level of awareness that was less like surveillance and more like a kind of deep practiced attention, the kind you developed and after years of needing to know where people were and what state they were in before anything else. He sat down across from her without preamble. "I heard Walker went to Davis this morning," he said. "He did. How are you feeling about it?" She looked at him. "Honestly, only way worth talking." "I'm angry," she said. "Not at Walker. I understand Walker. He's doing what his training tells him to do, identify the weak point and report it. He's not wrong that I've been performing below standard. He's just wrong about why." She paused. "I'm angry because nobody in that room asked why. Not one person. They heard the data and they reached the conclusion, and the conclusion was acceptable to everyone because it fit a story they were already telling about me." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You know what I find interesting," he said. "What? You just described very precisely and very accurately the exact kind of analytical failure that gets people killed in the field. Looking at the data, reaching the obvious conclusion, not asking why. He held her gaze. You know how to think better than that. You've always known. The question is whether you can apply it to yourself the way you apply it to mission analysis. She was quiet. Your last deployment, Cole said. Tell me what actually happened. She looked at the wall for a moment. Then she looked back at him. We were 14 hours into an extraction, she said. Her voice was steady. She had told this story to a debrief team, to a medical evaluator, to herself at 3 in the morning, more times than she could count. But she had never told it to someone who already knew the outcome and was asking anyway specifically to understand her, not the mission. There was a secondary element we hadn't anticipated, a civilian presence in an area that should have been clear. We had maybe 4 seconds to make a call. And you made it, Cole said. I made it. And it was the right call. The mission succeeded. Everyone came home. She stopped. Except the call required me to accept a risk I had never accepted before. A specific kind of risk. The kind where the math works out, but the math is about people, not numbers. Cole nodded slowly. And since then, he said, every time you're in a high-pressure scenario and a split-second decision is required, part of me goes back to that room, she said, for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and in those seconds, I'm not here, I'm there, and by the time I come back, the moment has passed. The equipment bay was very quiet around them. Cole leaned back slightly. Can I tell you something, he said, please. Every operator I have ever known who went through something like that, not all of them, but the best ones, the ones who came out of it and became something better than what they were before, every single one of them had the same problem you have. Not the hesitation. The story they told about the hesitation. He leaned forward. You've been telling yourself that something is wrong with you, that you broke, that the hesitation is evidence of damage, but you know what it actually is. She waited. It's evidence that you understood the weight of what you were doing, he said. The operators who never hesitate after something like that are not the strong ones. They're the ones who didn't fully process what happened. You processed it. Your nervous system is being honest about the Kia. He paused. The problem is, you've been treating that honesty like a malfunction. She stared at him. Something in her chest moved in a way that was uncomfortable and necessary simultaneously. The board meets in 11 days, she said. I know. If I can't demonstrate clean performance by then we'll deal with that when it happens, Cole said. But I'm not interested in managing the board right now. I'm interested in you. He stood. Tomorrow morning, 05:30 before everyone else gets to the field. Meet me at the North Range. She looked at him. What are we doing? Something that isn't on the evaluation schedule, he said. And something that isn't going to show up in any scoring matrix. He walked out. She sat in the equipment bay for a long time after that, the same way she had sat there the night before. But something was different now. The silence felt less like isolation and more like the kind of quiet that preceded something. She couldn't name what was coming. She wasn't sure Cole could either, not exactly. But for the first time in 4 months, she was not dreading what the next day would bring. She was waiting for it. 05:28, North Range. She was there before Cole was, which did not surprise her. She had not slept well, but she had slept, which was itself a minor victory. And she had arrived with the particular focused quality of someone who has made a decision to be present regardless of the cost. Cole arrived at 05:31. He was carrying nothing except a pair of training weapons and a small notebook, which he set on the bench without explanation. No scoring in, he said. No observers, no clock. She nodded. I'm going to run you through a series of scenarios, he said. Each one is going to push you to a decision point. When you reach it, I don't want you to perform the decision. I want you to notice what happens in your body a half second before the decision. She frowned slightly. Notice it. Not fix it, not push through it. Notice it. He looked at her directly. You've been trying to override the thing that happens. I want you to learn what it feels like first, because you cannot navigate something you've never properly identified. This was different from anything any evaluator or instructor had offered her. Different from Davis's put it down, different from the clinical observation of the scoring matrix. Different from Walker's, this is a safety problem. This was someone trying to understand the mechanism. She felt something loosen very slightly in her chest. Okay, she said. They worked for 2 hours. Cole ran her through scenarios that were deceptively simple in structure and genuinely difficult in the specific way that mattered. Each one contained a moment of sudden pressure that resembled in its neurological demand the kind of moment that had been sending her back to that room on the other side of the world. The first 3 times she hesitated. She also, for the first time, noticed the hesitation from the inside instead of experiencing it purely as a delay in her output. She felt it arrive, a sudden tightening in her sternum, a half second where her peripheral awareness narrowed, a sensation she could only describe as the present moment, briefly competing with a different moment for control of her attention. There, Cole said the third time it happened. He wasn't pointing at her reaction time. He was pointing at her face. That's the one. What did that feel like? She told him. He listened without interrupting. Good, he said when she finished. Now you know what to look for. Knowing what to look for doesn't fix the delay. No, he said, but it stops you from being ambushed by it. There's a difference between being in a storm you can see coming and being in a storm that hits you from behind. He picked up the training weapon again. Again. Fourth attempt, the pressure point arrived. She felt it come. And because she felt it come, she had the single fraction of a second she needed to make a choice before it took over. She made the decision, clean, direct, on time. Cole said nothing. He didn't need to. She knew. That's what we're building, he said quietly. Not speed, not override, recognition. The moment you can name it, you have just enough time to act through it instead of waiting for it to pass. She stood on the North Range in the early morning light and felt something she hadn't felt in 4 months. Not wholeness, not recovery, not the absence of what she had been carrying, but agency. The sense that the thing living inside her was not in charge. She was. 8 days left, she said. 8 days, Cole agreed. Is it enough? He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that doesn't contain false comfort, but also doesn't contain despair. The look of someone doing an honest calculation. It's enough to show the board something real, he said. Whether the board knows what to do with something real that I can't promise you. She nodded. She accepted that because she was not doing this for the board anymore. She was doing this because she was Maya Reynolds, and she had spent 12 years building something worth continuing, and she was not going to let 2 seconds of hesitation be the thing that defined the whole of it. Back on the main training field, the day's first exercise was assembling. Walker was already in position, running his pre-exercise checklist with the crisp efficiency that came naturally to him. He glanced over at Maya as she joined her position, and she saw him register something in her bearing, some small difference in the way she was carrying herself that morning, and she saw him not know what to do with it. Good, she thought, let him not know. The exercise began. It was a communication and coordination drill. Multiple elements, simultaneous tasking information, overload by design. The kind of exercise that tested how clearly you could think when everything around you was demanding your attention at once. Maya moved through the first phase cleanly. The second phase introduced a simulated communication failure on the primary channel. Maya shifted to secondary without breaking pace. She relayed the element positions to Walker without being asked. She identified a coordination gap on the left flank and called the adjustment. Walker, to his credit, executed it. The third phase introduced the pressure point, a sudden change in principal movement, new threat vector, decision required in under 4 seconds. She felt it come, the tightening, the narrowing, the half second where the other room tried to pull her back. She named it, she stayed, she called the decision. The exercise concluded. The evaluator, a solid, quiet man named Hendricks, who had said approximately 40 words to her in the entire program, looked at his scoring sheet and then looked at her. He made a notation. He said nothing, but he made the notation. Walker was looking at her from across the field. She looked back at him. She didn't say anything either. She didn't need to. They both knew something had just changed. After the exercise, Davis caught her on the way to the equipment check. Reynolds, he said, Senior Chief. He looked at her for a moment with that careful, experienced assessment she had come to recognize as his version of a thorough examination. Better, he said, one word. She held it the way you hold something that cost a great deal to receive. Thank you, Senior Chief, she said. He moved on. One word. Better. It wasn't enough to save her evaluation. It wasn't enough to change Walker's assessment or make the board's decision easy. It wasn't a reversal or a rescue or a happy ending handed to her in the middle of a story that still had 8 days of hard work left in it. But it was real, and real she was learning was worth more than any performance she could put on. That evening, she called Caroline. "Hey, soldier," Caroline answered, same as always. "Hey," Maya said, "I have something to tell you." "Tell me." "I had 2 seconds today," Maya said, "not 2 seconds of hesitation. 2 seconds where I knew it was coming, and I stayed anyway." The line was quiet for a moment, then Caroline said very softly, another silence. "That's everything, Maya," Caroline said. "I know," she replied. "That's literally everything." She sat outside the mess hall and let her sister's voice settle over her like something she hadn't known she needed until it arrived. The base moved around her, the quiet, purposeful machinery of people preparing for tomorrow. 8 days remained. She was not the same person who had arrived here. She was something harder to name than that, not recovered, not fixed, not the warrior she had been before. Something else. Something that had looked at its own damage directly and decided to work with it instead of around it. Something that could feel the storm coming and choose to stand in it rather than brace against it. Something that Walker on his current timeline of experience could not yet see. But Commander Nathan Cole could see it, and more importantly, for the first time in 4 months, Maya Reynolds could see it too. 7 days left before the board met and Walker filed the formal complaint. Maya found out the way she found out most things on this base, not through official channels, but through the kind of ambient awareness that a decade of operational service had permanently installed in her. She was in the equipment bay when she heard 2 junior evaluators talking on the other side of the wall, and she heard Walker's name, and she heard the word formal, and she understood immediately what it meant. She didn't go looking for Davis. She didn't go looking for Cole. She sat with it for exactly 4 minutes. She counted because counting was something she could control, and then she stood up and went to the range. She was not falling apart. She was angry. And angry, she had learned over the past 2 days, was something she could work with. Anger had direction. Anger had energy. Anger was in its own way the opposite of the dissociation that had been pulling her backward for 4 months. When she was angry, she was here, fully and completely here, in this moment on this base with this problem in front of her. She fired until the anger became something cleaner. Not gone. Cleaner. There was a difference. Cole found her 40 minutes later. He said nothing about the complaint immediately, which told her he already knew and had been deciding how to tell her. "Say it," she said, not looking up from the weapon she was reassembling. "Walker submitted a formal request for early evaluation board convening," Cole said. He cited operational safety concerns. "How many signatures does he have?" A pause. 3. She set down the component she was holding. Picked it up again. Her hands were steady. "Which 3? Ramos, Briggs, and Chen?" She knew all 3 of them. Ramos and Briggs she had barely interacted with. Chen had been in her element for 2 exercises and had said nothing directly critical to her face, which apparently had not prevented him from signing his name to a document that said she was dangerous. "When does the board convene if Walker gets what he wants?" she asked. 4 days, Cole said. Instead of 7, she absorbed that. 4 days instead of 7, 3 days removed from her timeline, without warning, without her consent, on the basis of a complaint filed by a man who had thrown furniture when discussing her performance and was apparently considered a credible source for an official operational safety concern. She looked up at Cole. "Can you stop it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I can delay it by 48 hours, he said. "Maybe. I have to call in something I'd rather save for a different situation." "Do it," she said. "Maya." "Do it," she said again. Her voice was not loud. It was the precise weighted tone she used when she had considered all available information and arrived at a conclusion she was not going to revisit. "Give me the time. I'll do the rest." Cole looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. He walked out of the range, and she heard him on his phone before he was 10 feet away. She picked up the weapon. She went back to work. That evening, Davis called her into his office for the first time since the program began. It was a small room with a government-issued desk and a single window, in the particular energy of a space that had contained a lot of difficult conversations and would contain many more. Davis was standing when she entered. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. He sat. He put a folder on the desk between them, but didn't open it. You know why you're here, he said. The complaint, she said. The complaint. He pressed his fingertips together. I want to be straight with you, Reynolds. Straighter than I've been, maybe. Walker's complaint is procedurally legitimate. I don't agree with the motivation behind it or the timing, but I cannot dismiss it without cause. The signatures give it weight. Chen surprised me, she said. Davis looked at her steadily. Did it? She thought about it. No, she admitted. Not really. Chen is a careful operator who doesn't take risks he doesn't understand. You are right now a risk he doesn't understand. Davis paused. That's not an accusation. That's an observation. I know. He opened the folder. He turned it so she could read the page facing her. It was her evaluation summary, updated through the current date. She read it quickly the way she read all documents, scanning for the critical nodes, the points where language shifted from descriptive to evaluative. She saw the word inconsistent 3 times. She saw the phrase delayed response to stimulus twice. She saw at the bottom a line that Davis had added in handwriting rather than typed text. Recommend extended observation prior to board assessment. Operator demonstrates variable but improving performance. Premature board convening may not reflect accurate capability picture. She looked up. Davis was watching her. You wrote that, she said. I wrote it this afternoon, he said, after I watched the morning exercise. She remembered Hendricks making that notation. The single word Davis had offered her afterward. Better. That's your official position, she asked. That's my official position, he said. It's not a guarantee of anything. The board will look at the full record. Walker's signatures carry weight whether I like it or not. He paused. But it means you go in with at least one voice in the room that has read the complete picture. She looked at the folder. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Davis replied. There's something else. He turned the folder back toward himself and closed it. The final evaluation exercise is the day before the board convenes, he said. It was always the most complex scenario in the program. Search and rescue multi-element coordination ejected threat variables. Whoever leads the primary element on that exercise, their performance carries the most weight in the final assessment. She understood where this was going. Walker is listed as primary element lead, she said. Walker was listed as primary element lead, Davis said. As of an hour ago, I reassigned the role. The room was very quiet. She looked at him. You're giving it to me, she said. I'm giving it to you, he confirmed. Walker is going to object loudly and officially, and that objection is going into his file. But the decision is mine to make, and I've made it. He held her gaze. This is not Charity Reynolds. I want to be clear about that. This is not me feeling sorry for you or trying to manufacture a favorable outcome. I am giving you the highest stakes exercise in this evaluation because I watched you this morning and I believe you are the best qualified person in this program to lead it. She held very still. You believe that? She asked. I wouldn't say it otherwise. She stood. She looked at him across the desk, this man who had told her to put it down, and also written recommend extended observation in his own handwriting, who had watched her with the patient, unglamorous attention of someone who cared about getting things right more than being comfortable. I won't waste it, she said. I know you won't, he said. She walked out. In the corridor, she stopped and stood against the wall for a moment, not because she needed to collect herself, because she needed to let something land that was too large and too real to absorb while moving. Davis had just handed her the exact thing that could either end her career cleanly or save it entirely. And Cole had bought her the time to prepare for it. And somewhere on this base, Walker was about to find out that the woman he had called a liability had just been handed the lead role in the final exercise. And his reaction to that information was going to tell everyone in this program exactly what kind of officer he was becoming. She pushed off the wall and walked toward the barracks. She had a mission to plan. The next morning, she was at the mission planning table at 0400. Not because she had been told to, because she needed the time and she took it the way she had always taken what she needed from the hours that other people were sleeping. The exercise parameters were complex. 12 pages of scenario documentation, multiple element positions, a principal in a dynamic location that would shift twice during the exercise, 3 possible threat injection points, any or all of which might be activated, communication across 4 channels simultaneously, decision authority residing solely with the primary element lead with her at every critical juncture. She read all 12 pages twice. Then she read them a third time, specifically looking for the decision points. The moments in the scenario architecture where hesitation would compound and a delayed call would cascade into a scoring failure. She identified seven moments where her history of hesitation would be most likely to surface. She wrote them down. Next to each one, she wrote what the hesitation would feel like from the inside, the specific physical sensations she had been learning to identify in the North Range sessions with Cole. The tightening, the narrowing, the half second where the other room tried to claim her. Then she wrote next to each of those descriptions a single word. Stay, not perform, not decide, not execute, stay. Because Cole had taught her that the decision followed naturally from presence. The problem was never that she didn't know what to do. The problem was that she kept leaving. She was still at the table when Walker found her. She didn't hear him come in. She was deep enough in the planning documentation that she had for a period of time that she couldn't have measured, precisely been completely absorbed. Not in the dissociative way that had been plaguing her for months. In the operational way, the way she used to get absorbed in mission prep when her mind was fully at her own disposal. She heard him stop in the doorway. She looked up. Walker's face was a careful composition. He had clearly made a decision about how he was going to handle this before he walked through the door, and the decision he had made was controlled. No thrown furniture, no raised voice. He was giving her the version of himself that he wanted on the record. They told me last night, he said. Okay, she said. He walked to the table and stood on the opposite side. He looked at the papers spread in front of her. He looked at the notes she had made. He looked at the single word written next to each decision point. She watched him read it. He looked up. Stay, he said. Personal notation, she said, not relevant to you. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. This surprised her. She had expected him to say his piece from a standing position and leave. The sitting down meant he had decided on a longer conversation, which meant he had something he genuinely wanted to say and hadn't figured out how to say it standing up. She waited. I filed the complaint because I believed it, he said. I want you to know that. I wasn't trying to remove you for political reasons. I wasn't trying to protect my own position. I watched you in those exercises and I saw what I saw and I made the call I thought I was supposed to make. I know, she said. I still think you've been struggling. I know that too. But I watched you yesterday morning, he said. The communications drill. He paused. That adjustment you called on the left flank. I missed it. I wouldn't have caught it for another 60 seconds. He was quiet for a moment. A decorated operator sees something in 4 seconds that I would have needed 60. That is not a person who has lost her ability. Maya looked at him across the table. This was costing him something. She could see that. Walker was not a man who arrived easily at the admission that he might have been wrong about something, not because he was dishonest, but because he had built his entire operational identity on the certainty of his own assessments. Questioning that certainty was not a small thing for him. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying I don't know what you're carrying, Walker said. I said that to you once before condescendingly, and you called it out. This time I'm saying it because I mean it. I genuinely don't know what happened to you before you came here. And I made official assessments about your capability without knowing that, and I'm not sure that was right. She held his gaze. It wasn't right, she said, not harshly, simply. He absorbed that. No, he said, it probably wasn't. They sat in silence for a moment. Not comfortable silence. Not the silence of resolved things. But the silence of two people who were not friends would probably never be friends, but had arrived at a place where they could see each other more accurately than they had been seeing each other before. I'm still leading the final exercise, she said. I know, dear Mom. Are you going to make it difficult for me? He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. I'm going to do my job. He stood up. That's all I've ever been trying to do. He walked out. Maya looked at the papers in front of her. She picked up her pen. She added an 8th decision point to the list. Next to it, she wrote, when Walker doubts you, and next to that, the same single word, stay. The day before the final exercise, Cole ran her through one last session on the North Range. It was different from the previous sessions. Less structured. He didn't set scenarios. He didn't run her through decision points. He simply stood beside her and let her work at her own pace, and every so often he said something that wasn't instruction and wasn't encouragement, but was something in between, the kind of thing you say to someone when you are not trying to change them, but to remind them of what they already are. "Tell me about your first real mission," he said at one point. She looked at him sideways. "Why tell him? Because I want you to remember who showed up on that one." She thought about it. The memory was old and clean and uncontaminated by everything that had happened since. She was 22 years old. She was terrified in the particular way you are terrified the first time, when you don't yet know whether you are the kind of person who holds together under real pressure or the kind who comes apart. She had held together. She told Cole about it, not the operational details which were classified, but the experience of it. The moment when everything she had trained for became suddenly real, and she had made a decision that worked and felt the click of someone who belonged in the place they had chosen to be. Cole listened. "That person is still in there," he said when she finished. "She's been quiet for a while," Maya said. "She was never gone," he said. "You just buried her under 4 months of trying to perform your way out of something you needed to live through instead." She was quiet. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "If I hesitate, you'll notice it coming," he said, "and you'll stay. That's all you need." She looked at him directly. This man who had seen something in her from an observation platform when everyone else was seeing only the deficit. This man who had sat in equipment bays and on range benches and given her something that no evaluation metric had ever been designed to measure: the experience of being seen accurately at the worst point in her professional life by someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. "Why did you bother?" she asked. He looked at her. "Excuse me. With me, why did you bother? You're a senior commander. You're here in an observation capacity. You had no obligation to do any of what you've done this past week." She paused. "Why, Marianne?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Because 20 years ago," he said, "I was you. Different circumstance, different mission, same damage." He paused. "And someone bothered with me. And I am here because they did." He looked at the range. "That's why." She had not expected that. She held it carefully. "Who was it?" she asked. "Commander James Whitfield," Cole said. "He's retired now, lives in Maine. I send him a letter every year on the anniversary of the exercise that almost ended my career." He glanced at her. "He always writes back." She looked at the range in front of her. Something settled inside her that was not resolution or repair, but was the closest thing to peace she had felt in 4 months, the understanding that she was not an anomaly, that this kind of damage was not weakness dressed up in a clinical label, that the lineage of people who had survived it was long and real and included someone standing right next to her who had chosen specifically and deliberately to pass on what had been passed to him. She raised the weapon. She fired. Clean, centered, exactly where she intended. "There she is," Cole said quietly. Maya said nothing, but she was smiling. She did not sleep well the night before the final exercise. She had not expected to. The last time she had slept perfectly the night before, something high stakes, she was probably 19 years old and still young enough to believe that sleep was something your body simply did, regardless of what the following day held. She lay in her bunk and she ran the exercise parameters in her mind, not anxiously, but the way a musician runs through a piece before a performance, not to reassure themselves that they know it, but to feel the shape of it, the flow of it, the places where it breathed and the places where it required something sudden. She identified the 7 decision points again. She felt for each one. She said the word to herself each time: stay. At 0300, she gave up on sleep, got up and sat at the small desk in her room. She took out a piece of paper and wrote a letter to her sister, not because Caroline needed a letter, because Maya needed to write one. She wrote about the past week. She wrote about Cole and the North Range and the word stay. She wrote about Walker sitting across the planning table from her and saying, "I don't know what you're carrying," and meaning it for the first time. She wrote about Davis's handwritten notation in her folder and what it had felt like to read it, like a door that had been sealed for 4 months, cracking open just enough to let in something that might not be light, but was at least the possibility of light. She wrote, "I don't know what happens tomorrow. I don't know if 2 seconds are going to show up again and cost me everything. But I know that I am not who Walker said I was. I know that whatever happened to me on that last deployment was real and it was hard and it changed me. And that is not the same as breaking. I think I forgot that. I think I needed someone to stand next to me and remember it for me until I could remember it myself. She wrote, "I am going to do this tomorrow." She folded the letter. She put it in her jacket pocket. She went back to her bunk and lay down and closed her eyes, and sometime before 0500, she slept. The morning of the final exercise arrived the way significant mornings always arrived for Maya Reynolds, quietly, without announcement, with a flatness to the early air that contained within it the held breath of something that hadn't happened yet. She was dressed and at the staging area before anyone else. The other operators arrived in ones and twos. Chen looked at her and looked away. Briggs nodded. Ramus, who had signed Walker's complaint, met her eyes for a half second and then found something else to look at. Walker arrived last. He took his assigned position in the secondary element without comment. He looked at her once. She looked back. He nodded. Small, minimal, but real. She nodded back. The evaluator Hendricks stepped to the front of the staging area with his clipboard. "Final exercise," he said. His voice was the same flat, neutral instrument it always was. "Primary element lead is Reynolds. Secondary element lead is Walker. This exercise will be evaluated in full. All scoring is live." He looked down at his clipboard and then back up. "Questions nobody asked any?" He looked at Maya. "Reynolds," he said, "your team." She turned to face the group. She looked at the faces in front of her, some skeptical, some neutral, some Walker carefully blank in a way that was its own kind of attentiveness. She spoke clearly and without hurry. "We've all read the parameters," she said. "We know the principal's location and we know it's going to shift. We know there are 3 possible threat injection points. We are not going to try to predict which ones activate. We are going to respond to what actually happens." She paused. "The only thing I'm asking of every person in this element is this. Trust the person next to you. When I call a decision, execute it without hesitation. Not because you think I'm infallible. Because in the field, hesitation on a called decision is more dangerous than the wrong decision executed cleanly." A silence. Walker's eyes were steady on hers. "We move in 4 minutes," she said. She turned back toward the course. Behind her, she heard the team begin its final equipment checks. She heard the sound of people choosing to be ready. And in that sound, in that ordinary, purposeful noise of operators preparing for what was next, she felt the thing she had been trying to find for 4 months. Not the absence of what had happened to her, not the recovery of who she had been before. Something better than both of those things. The knowledge that she was standing in the present moment fully and completely, and that the present moment was where she had always been most dangerous. The radio crackled. Hendricks's voice came through. "Exercise begins in 60 seconds. Maya Reynolds took a breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She checked her equipment with hands that were absolutely steady, and then she led her team forward into the only thing that had ever mattered. Not the exercise, not the score, not the board meeting on the other side of it. The next moment, and the one after that, and the one after that, the exercise started clean. Maya moved her primary element through the first phase with a precision that surprised even the people who had wanted to believe in her. Her calls were short, direct, and correct. Her communication across the 4 channels was so clean that Hendricks, watching from his evaluation position, made 3 notations in the first 8 minutes. Not failures, but observed strengths. The kind of thing a thorough evaluator records when performance exceeds expectation in specific measurable ways. The team moved like a team for the first time, not like a collection of individuals performing parallel tasks in the same space, like something connected, like something that trusted the voice at the center of it. Walker, running secondary element on the right flank, executed every called adjustment without delay. She could hear his voice on the channel clip, professional, efficient, and she recognized in it the sound of a man who had made a decision about how he was going to conduct himself and was holding to it with the discipline that whatever else she thought of Walker, she had never doubted he possessed. Phase 1 completed. Hendricks said nothing. He made another notation. Phase 2 began and the principal moved. This was the first scheduled shift in location, something every operator in the exercise had read in the brief, and therefore anticipated intellectually without being able to fully anticipate operationally, because knowing a variable is coming and responding to it cleanly when it arrives are 2 completely different skills. The principal moved left toward the secondary corridor. Walker's element was positioned on the right. The geometry of it required an immediate rotation, secondary element, swinging across while primary held the original entry vector, long enough to maintain pressure on the first threat position. Maya called it before the principal had finished moving. Walker, swing left, full rotation. I've got the primary vector, you take the corridor. A half-second of silence on the channel, then Walker's voice, clean and immediate. Copy, moving. The rotation happened in under 20 seconds. Clean, no gap in coverage. Hendricks made another notation. Maya felt the exercise breathing around her, felt its rhythms and its pressure points, the way she had felt them in the planning documentation at 0400, the way she had felt everything in the field for 12 years before 4 months of internal weather had temporarily obscured that feeling. It was back, not perfectly, not without effort, but back. Then the first threat injection hit. It came from position 2, one of the 3 possible activation points she had identified in her pre-exercise analysis. A simulated armed presence moving from an unexpected angle toward the principal's new location in the secondary corridor. The channel erupted with voices. 2 members of Walker's element called the contact simultaneously, their reports overlapping in a way that created a half-second of communication confusion. Exactly the kind of information overload the exercise architects had designed into the scenario to see how the primary element lead responded to noise. Maya sorted it in real time. Walker, I have it. Hold your position. Chen, close left. Ramos, you're with me. She felt it then, the tightening. It came exactly the way she knew it would. The narrowing of peripheral awareness. The half-second where the other room reached for her dark, distant reel of memory, dressed up as a present moment trying to take the wheel. She named it. She stayed. Moving once, she said, and she moved. The injection was handled in 11 seconds. 11 seconds from the moment the threat appeared to the moment it was neutralized, the principal was repositioned, and the element was back in formation. Walker's voice came through the channel immediately after. Clean call, he said, just that. 2 words. But on the channel in the middle of an exercise with the full evaluation recording running, it meant something. Hendricks made a notation. Maya did not allow herself to feel the relief of it yet. There were still 2 possible injection points were remaining, and the principal had 1 more scheduled location shift. And the exercise was not done, and she had learned in 12 years of operational service that the moment you exhale before the mission is finished is the moment the mission finds its way to punish you for the assumption. She kept moving. She kept her voice steady on the channel. She kept her team in front of her attention and behind her protection simultaneously, which was the particular kind of split awareness that defined what a real element lead did under pressure, not just executing a role, but holding the entire human architecture of the team in mind at every moment, knowing where each person was, what each person needed, what each person was about to do before they did it. That was the thing Walker couldn't have seen from his evaluation of her individual performance metrics. That was the thing the scoring matrix couldn't capture. That was the thing Davis had been trying to see and Cole had seen from the beginning. She didn't just know how to operate. She knew how to lead. The second threat injection came from position 3. It was designed to be the most disorienting of the 3 possible activations, a simultaneous dual vector contact that split the element's attention in 2 directions at once and required the primary lead to make a rapid prioritization call with incomplete information on both vectors. Both contacts appeared at the same moment. The channel flooded again, and this time something unexpected happened. One of the contacts, the one on the left vector, made an erratic movement that didn't match any scenario parameter Maya had studied. It wasn't scripted, she was certain of that. She had read the 12 pages 3 times, and she knew every scripted behavior in the exercise architecture. This was a live injection, something Hendricks or one of the senior evaluators had added in real time. An extra variable dropped into the exercise without warning to see what the primary lead did when the scenario exceeded the brief entirely. For 1 full second, Maya didn't know what it was. She processed the movement. She cross-referenced it against everything she knew. She ran the calculation with the speed of someone who had been making calculations like this in real environments for over a decade. And then she understood. The erratic movement was a non-combatant, a simulated civilian presence that had been inserted into the scenario, moving in a pattern that mimicked panic rather than threat. And the reason this mattered, the reason it had been inserted specifically, She realized with sudden and complete clarity was that on her last deployment, a situation involving a non-combatant presence in a threat environment was the moment that had changed everything. Whoever had designed this insertion knew her record. They had put it in the exercise deliberately. They were watching to see whether she would freeze. 1 second had already passed. She felt the tightenings hit her like a wave harder than any of the previous moments, harder than anything she had experienced on Cole's North Range, harder than anything she had prepared for, because this was not a remembered version of that night. This was a deliberate reconstruction of the precise neurological trigger that had been stealing seconds from her for 4 months. 2 seconds. Cole's voice was not in her ear. He was somewhere off the evaluation field, observing from a distance, because he was not in this exercise. He was not allowed to be. This moment was hers alone. She felt the other room reach for her. She named it. And then she said the words she had written next to every decision point on her list. She said it inside her own chest where nobody could hear it. Stay. She stayed. Walker, she said, and her voice was absolutely level. Right vector is threat. Execute. Left vector is non-combatant. Chen, pull back and establish safe corridor. Do not engage. A half-second of silence. Then Walker executing without hesitation. Copy. Then Chen. Moving. The right vector threat was neutralized in 8 seconds. Chen established the safe corridor in 12. The principal was secured. The exercise continued. Maya stood in the operational space with her heart at 130 beats per minute and her hands completely steady and something moving through her chest that was not quite triumph and not quite relief and not quite anything. And she had a clean name for a feeling like surviving a storm that was designed specifically for you and discovering that you were built for exactly that. Hendricks said nothing. He was writing. He had been writing for some time. The principal's second location shift came and went. Maya called it clean. Walker executed. The element moved as a unit through the final phase of the exercise with the kind of coordinated efficiency that looked from the outside like it had always been this way, like this team had trained together for months instead of performing together for the first time under evaluation conditions. And then it was over. Hendricks looked up from his clipboard. Exercise complete, he said. The channel went quiet. The team stood where they were breathing. Maya lowered her communication device and stood still for a moment, just breathing, just letting the exercise settle into the past tense where it now permanently belonged. She heard Walker's footsteps before she saw him. He had crossed from the secondary element position to hers, which required covering ground. He didn't have to cover. Nobody had called for a debrief formation yet, and there was no operational reason for him to move toward her. He moved toward her because he chose to. He stopped in front of her. She looked at him. His face was not the face of the man who had thrown furniture. It was not the face of the man who had filed a formal complaint. It was not the face of the man who had looked at her with that terrible certain pity that was somehow worse than contempt. It was the face of a young officer who had just watched something he had not believed was possible and was processing the revision it required. The non-combatant call, he said. Yes, she said. That wasn't in the brief. No. You had it in under 3 seconds. She looked at him steadily. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I owe you. He stopped. Started again. I made official statements about your capability. I got 3 people to sign their names to a document that questioned your fitness. And I did all of that without once asking what you had been through before you got here. He paused. That's not how I want to operate. Maya said nothing immediately. She let him sit with the full weight of what he had said. Then she said, you're going to meet people throughout your career who are carrying things you can't see. You're going to be tempted to evaluate them on the visible output without asking about the invisible input. What you choose to do with that temptation is going to define what kind of officer you become. He held her gaze. I understand, he said. I know you do, she replied. That's why I'm telling you. Hendricks called the full team into debrief formation before Walker could respond. They separated without another word, but the conversation sat between them differently than all the previous ones, had not as a wound, not as a debt, but as something that had been built in the wreckage of a conflict and might over time become something useful. The debrief was clinical and thorough the way Hendricks did everything. He went through each phase of the exercise in sequence, noting specific decision points, flagging notable execution moments, recording where the team had exceeded expectation and where the performance had been merely adequate. He spent 4 minutes on the dual vector injection at position 3. 4 minutes. In a debrief that ran 32 minutes total, he spent 4 of them on the decision Maya had made in under 3 seconds. He didn't editorialize. He didn't praise her. He described what had happened with the flat, factual precision of a man who recorded performance without commentary. But he spent 4 minutes on it, and every person in that room understood what 4 minutes meant. When the debrief ended and the team was dismissed, Maya looked for Cole. She found him at the edge of the evaluation area, standing alone, which meant he had been there the entire exercise. He had watched all of it. She walked toward him. He watched her come. When she was close enough that their conversation would stay between them, she stopped. "The non-combatant insertion," she said. "Yes," he said. "That was you." He said nothing. "Cole." He looked at her with that steady, self-contained expression that she had learned over the past week contained more information than most people's most animated faces. He was not apologizing. He was also not denying. "I asked Hendricks to add a variable," he said finally. "I told him what variable. I told him why." She looked at him. "You put the exact thing in the exercise that has been sending me backward for 4 months," she said. "Yes. Because you needed to know if what we built in the North Range would hold under the real version of it." "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "And if I had frozen," she asked, "then we would have known what still needed work," he said, "and I would have made a different argument to the board tomorrow." She absorbed that. "You were going to argue for me either way," she said. "You earned either way," he said. "The freeze would have told me you needed more time, not that you needed to be out. There's a difference. Most people on that evaluation board don't make that distinction." "I do." She looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't freeze," she said. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." A beat of silence. 3 seconds, she said. Cole looked at her. "You said it yourself," she said. "In the equipment bay that first night. 0.3 of a second is not insignificant. And I just made the hardest call this exercise had in under 3 full seconds." "Yes," he said simply. "That's who I am," she said. Not defiantly, not triumphantly, with the quiet, grounded certainty of someone who has just reconfirmed something they always knew but had temporarily lost access to. Cole looked at her the way he had looked at her that first night in the equipment bay, like she was still standing, like she had always been standing, like the question of whether she was finished had been answered so long ago that it was almost strange it had ever been asked. "Yes," he said again, "that's who you are." The board convened the following morning. Maya was not in the room when they deliberated. That was standard procedure. The operator under evaluation waited outside while the board reviewed the complete record, heard from the program instructors, and made their determination. The door was closed, and the conversation behind it was official and private, and would eventually produce a document that would determine the next chapter of her career. She sat in a corridor chair outside that door. She had been in harder places. She had waited in harder silences. But this one had its own particular quality, the silence of someone who had done everything within their power to change a situation and was now sitting in the part that was no longer within their power. The part where other people held the verdict. Davis went in first, which was expected. Then Hendricks. Then 2 senior evaluators whose names she knew but whose faces she had rarely seen up close. Cole went in last. Before he entered, he paused beside her chair. She looked up at him. He didn't say anything reassuring. He didn't say it would be fine or that the board would see what he saw or that she had nothing to worry about. He knew her well enough by now to know that she didn't want those things from him. He said, "Whatever they decide in there, you know what happened on that field yesterday." "Yes," she said. "Hold on to that," he said. He went in. The door closed. She sat. She had the letter she had written to Caroline at 0300 in her jacket pocket. She hadn't mailed it. She had simply carried it the way you carry something when you need to remember that there is a person on the other side of the current moment who knows who you are and will be there regardless of what the current moment produces. She thought about Caroline saying, "That's everything, Maya. That's literally everything." She thought about the first time she had said, "I am struggling," out loud, and how much it had cost and how much lighter it had made her simultaneously, like paying a debt you have been carrying so long you forgot you owed it. She thought about Cole telling her about James Whitfield in Maine, who always wrote back. She thought about Davis writing recommend extended observation in his own handwriting. She thought about Walker standing in front of her after the exercise with the revised face of a man learning something he needed to learn. She thought about the words she had written next to all 7 decision points on her list. Stay. The door opened 53 minutes after it had closed. Davis was the first one out. He looked at her without expression, which told her nothing. Behind him came the senior evaluators, then Hendricks, then last again Cole. She stood up. Davis stopped in front of her. Board's determination is complete, he said. Sir, she said. He looked at her for a moment with that careful, experienced assessment that she now recognized as something it had taken him decades to develop the ability to see a person with accuracy rather than convenience. The formal complaint has been noted and dismissed, he said. The evaluation record has been reviewed in full. The board's determination is that Lieutenant Reynolds demonstrated sufficient performance improvement during the evaluation period to warrant continued active status. He paused. You're staying in the program. She held very still. Additionally, Davis continued, the board has a secondary recommendation. He glanced down at the folder in his hand. Based on the nature of your performance trajectory during this evaluation, specifically the pattern of your struggles and your recovery, there is a request from 2 board members that you be considered for a combat trauma consultation role within the SEAL training structure. Not as a demotion, as a designation. There is a growing recognition that operators who have navigated what you've navigated bring something to the training environment that cannot be replicated by operators who haven't. She looked at him. That's not a replacement for active duty, he said. It's an addition, an acknowledgement that your specific experience has value beyond your individual field performance. She was quiet for a moment. Which 2 board members made the recommendation, she asked. Davis glanced toward Cole, who was standing slightly apart from the group with his arms at his sides and his expression entirely neutral. I'm not at liberty to say, Davis said. She looked at Cole. Cole looked at the ceiling with the carefully maintained innocence of a man who had never in his life arranged anything. She almost laughed. She didn't, but she almost did. I accept the determination, she said to Davis, and I'll give the secondary recommendation serious consideration. Davis nodded. That's all I need. He turned and walked away, and the other evaluators followed, and then it was just her and Cole standing in the corridor. She looked at him. Which 2 board members? She said. I heard it was very competitive, he said. Cole. He looked at her directly, and his expression for the first time since she had known him was something that resembled a smile. You earned every word of it, he said. I just made sure it was in a language the board speaks. She thought about what to say. She had a dozen things she could say. She could thank him in the formal way, the way the military trained you to receive recognition professionally, briefly, without excessive display. She could make a joke, which was the other way operators handled moments that carried too much genuine feeling for straightforward expression. She could say nothing, which was sometimes the most accurate response when words weren't equal to the thing they were supposed to carry. She said, the letter to Whitfield, what do you write in it? Cole looked at her for a moment. I write about what I did that year, he said. Cases I saw, operators I worked with, things I learned. He paused. And I write about the day he said 3 words that made me understand I wasn't finished. She was quiet. What were the 3 words? She asked. Cole held her gaze. Trust yourself, he said, and your name. She stood in the corridor of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado and let those words land in the place where all the significant things landed. Not in her head where she analyzed and processed and calculated, but in the center of her chest where the truth lived when she stopped being afraid of it. Trust yourself, Maya. 3 words. Not an order, not an assessment, not a verdict from a board or a complaint from a peer or a notation in a folder or a reaction time on a scoring matrix. Permission. Permission to carry what had happened without being defined by it. Permission to be changed by the worst night of her operational life without being ended by it. Permission to stand in the present moment, this corridor, this morning, this particular configuration of light and silence, in the distant sound of a bass doing what it did every day, and know that she was still here, still capable, still exactly the warrior she had always been, even when 2 seconds of hesitation had made it look like something else entirely. She straightened. She looked at Cole. I have a question, she said. Ask it. James Whitfield, does he know what he did? Does he know how far his 3 words traveled? Cole smiled, then really smiled for the first time, and it changed his face completely. Made him look like the young operator he had once been before the years, in the missions, in the damage and the recovery, had layered over that version of him and become something harder and more durable and ultimately more valuable. He knows, Cole said. I make sure of it every year. She nodded. She thought about that, about how far 3 words could travel when they landed in the right place at the right moment. From Whitfield to Cole to the North Range in Coronado, where they had been spoken again, to a corridor outside a boardroom where they were landing for the 3rd time in a lineage that might not be finished yet, might never be finished. That was the thing about words that were true. They kept going. She picked up the folder Davis had left on the chair beside her updated evaluation record, the formal determination, the secondary recommendation, and she held it the way she held things that had cost something real to obtain. Walker was waiting outside the building when she walked out. I was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face doing the thing it had been doing since the exercise, that process of revision, of updating his internal model of a situation he had been certain about for too long. He looked at the folder in her hand. He read the answer in her face before she said anything. They kept you, he said. They kept me, she said. He nodded slowly. Good, he said, just that 1 word. But from Walker in that moment, it was not a small thing. She walked past him. She had a phone call to make. She knew exactly how it would begin. She knew Caroline would answer on the 2nd ring, quick and ready the way she always was. She knew she would say, hey, and Caroline would say, hey, soldier, back. And there would be a pause, and in that pause, everything that had happened in the past 8 weeks would exist between them like a held breath. And then Maya would say 4 words, they kept me in, and Caroline would make the sound she made when something she had been holding tension about finally resolved, and then they would talk for a long time the way sisters talk when one of them has been somewhere the other couldn't follow and has just come back. She found the payphone near the mess hall. She picked up the receiver. She put in the call. It rang once, then Caroline's voice, immediate and warm and exactly the same as it had always been. Hey, soldier. Maya closed her eyes. Hey, she said. And behind the word, behind the single syllable of it, was everything she had carried into this program, and everything she was still carrying, and everything she had found in the carrying of it, the North Range and the planning table, and the word stay, and Walker's revised face, and Cole's smile, and Davis's handwriting, and the particular quality of 3 words spoken in a corridor by a man who knew what they meant, because someone had once spoken them to him. I have something to tell you, she said, and she told her. Part 5, What She Became. Carolyn cried. She didn't cry often. She was the kind of woman who had learned early that being the stable one in a family required a certain discipline about when you allowed yourself to fall apart. But she cried that morning quietly on the other end of the phone line, and Maya listened to it and didn't try to fill the silence with anything, because some silences are the most honest communication available. You did it, Carolyn said when she could speak cleanly again. We did it, Maya said. Don't do that. Don't spread it around. You did it. Own it. Maya was quiet for a moment. I'm learning to, she said. She meant it. She was. The ownership of her own survival, not crediting it entirely to Cole, not diminishing it by distributing it across everyone who had helped, was something she was practicing the same way she had practiced recognizing the hesitation before it arrived, deliberately, with attention, without assuming it would become natural before it had earned the right to be natural. She stayed on the phone with Caroline for 40 minutes. When she hung up, she stood outside the mess hall for a moment, in the particular kind of quiet that follows a conversation that meant something, and she let the morning move around her, the base waking up the ordinary machinery of another day beginning its rotation. And she thought about the word Cole had used. Outlast, not outperform, outlast. She had outlasted it. Not perfectly, not without cost, not in the way she had originally imagined when she arrived at Coronado with 1 duffel bag and 10 years of memories in the belief that her record would speak for her. She had outlasted it by learning to speak for herself, by saying, I am struggling, to the one person who would hear it without judgment, by sitting in an equipment bay at 2,200 hours and telling the truth to a man who had already suspected it, by writing the word stay next to 7 decision points and then executing those decisions while the thing she was carrying tried to pull her somewhere else. She was still carrying it, That was the part that nobody's story about triumph ever quite told. Honestly, the thing didn't disappear because you won the deployment, the dark room, the call she had made that saved lives and cost her something she was still in the process of measuring. All of it was still in her, but it was in the right place now, not in the space between stimulus and response where it had been stealing seconds from her for 4 months, not in the gap where decisions were supposed to live. It was in her history, where it belonged. She walked back toward the barracks to collect her gear, and on the way she passed the firing range and she paused at the edge of it for a moment. The range was empty this early. The targets were set, the lanes were clean. She stood at the edge of it and remembered the first afternoon she had spent there alone, 90 minutes of work that the range safety officer named Cho had witnessed without comment, bringing her water and giving her what she needed most in that moment, someone nearby who asked nothing. She had never thanked him properly. She made a note to find him before she left. It was the kind of thing she had been doing more of lately, noticing the small kindnesses and treating them like they mattered because they did, because the accumulation of small kindnesses was what had held the structure of the past 8 weeks together when the large official systems had been on the verge of failing her. Davis's handwriting, Cole's presence on the North Range at 0530, Cho's water bottle, Carolyn answering on the second ring, Walker ultimately executing her calls without delay. None of those things were in any evaluation report. All of them had contributed to her standing in this corridor with a favorable board determination in her folder. She went to find her gear. 3 days after the board determination, before the program's completion ceremony, and before most of the evaluation candidates had begun making their post-program arrangements, Cole asked to meet her in the same equipment bay where their first conversation had happened. She arrived first. She sat on the same crate. She thought about the version of herself who had sat here 8 weeks ago, the woman who had been performing her way past something for 4 months and running out of ground to perform on. The woman who had heard Walker's voice through a door and not defended herself because she didn't have the energy for it, and also because some part of her, the part that was most honest with itself when everything else was stripped away, had not been entirely certain he was wrong. That woman felt like someone she had known a long time ago. Not a stranger, not someone to be ashamed of, just someone who had been in a very hard place and had not yet found the door. Cole came in without ceremony the way he did everything. He sat across from her. He had a folder. She looked at the folder. "Is that what I think it is?" she said. "Depends what you think it is," he said. He opened it and turned it toward her. It was a program outline, 12 pages double-sided. She scanned it the way she scanned everything, quickly looking for the critical notes. The language was formal and precise, the language of official military documentation, but the content was something she had not expected to see in a formal document. It was a curriculum, a training curriculum for a program that didn't exist yet. The title on the cover page was Combat Operational Stress Identification, Navigation and Return to Function, a Leadership and Mentorship Framework for Senior SEAL Personnel. She looked up. "This is a program you designed," she said. "This is a program I've been designing for 3 years," Cole said, waiting for the right circumstances to bring it forward officially. What were the right circumstances? He looked at her directly. Someone who had lived it from the inside and come out the other side within a recent enough timeline that the experience was still close and honest rather than retrospective and cleaned up, he said. Someone credible, someone whose record could not be dismissed, someone whose struggle had been visible enough that their recovery was also visible and therefore useful as demonstration. She absorbed that. "You were waiting for me," she said. Not accusatorially, just the way you state a fact when it arrives clearly. "I was waiting for someone like you," he said. "You happened to show up." She looked at the curriculum, 12 pages. She read more carefully this time. The program was built in 3 phases. The first phase was identification training, senior operators to recognize the specific markers of operational stress injury in their personnel, with an emphasis on the ways those markers could be misread as performance failure by evaluators who didn't know what they were looking at. The second phase was navigation frameworks for supporting operators through recovery without removing them from the operational community, which Cole had documented as the single most important factor in long-term outcome. The third phase was return to function-structured reintegration protocols that accounted for the specific neurological and psychological realities of trauma recovery, rather than treating it as a linear process with a clear endpoint. It was, she thought, the program that might have found her 4 months earlier. It was the program that might have meant she never arrived at Coronado with a reputation already in freefall. It was the program that would mean some future operator sitting in some future corridor outside some future boardroom might have the language and the framework and the institutional support to say what was happening to them before it had cost them everything. "You want me to help build it," she said. "I want you to co-author it," Cole said. "Your name on the cover, your experience in the curriculum, your voice in the training modules." He paused. "Not as a consolation prize for what happened here, not as a replacement for your operational career, as a contribution that nobody else in the current SEAL structure is positioned to make." She looked at the page in front of her. She thought about something Cole had told her during one of their early North Range sessions about how he had been trying to develop this framework for years but kept running into the same institutional resistance, the same argument that addressing operational stress too openly would undermine the culture of toughness that the SEAL program depended on. "How do you overcome that resistance?" she asked. "The institutional argument, the culture of toughness." "With evidence," Cole said, "with a documented case study of an operator who demonstrated clear operational stress, injury markers received targeted support instead of removal, and produced measurable performance improvement within a defined timeline." He paused. "You are the evidence, Maya. Your evaluation record is the case study. Everything that happened on this base over the past 8 weeks is the argument." She was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the cover page again. She thought about the operator she had been before the last deployment. Sharp, certain, instinctive, fast. The operators whose record had impressed commanders and whose name had appeared in training briefs as an example of exceptional tactical judgment. She had spent 4 months trying to get back to that version of herself. She understood now that she was never going back to that version, not because that version was lost, but because she was something more now. That version had never sat with her own damage and looked at it directly and chosen to stay. That version had never written the word "stay" next to 7 decision points and then executed those decisions while the worst night of her operational life tried to claim her attention. That version had never been in the position of needing someone to see her accurately and then being given that gift and understanding from the inside what it cost to give it and what it meant to receive it. She was not less than what she had been. She was more. "Yes," she said. Cole looked at her. "Yes," she said again more clearly. "I'll co-author it." He nodded once. He closed the folder and pushed it across the crate toward her. "It's yours now, too," he said. She picked it up. It was heavier than 12 pages should be. She understood why. The completion ceremony for the evaluation program was 3 days later. It was a small, functional event. The SEAL community did not go in for elaborate ceremony, understanding that the work itself was the point and recognition was secondary, but it was attended by the senior personnel on base, including several officers whose presence indicated that the evaluation cohort had been watched with a level of interest that went beyond the ordinary. Maya sat in the formation with the other operators who had completed the program. Walker was 2 seats to her left. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of the arrangement of people in any room she occupied, not anxiously, not strategically, but with the automatic environmental mapping that 12 years of operational service had made as involuntary as breathing. He was sitting straight. He was dressed correctly. He looked like what he was, a talented young officer with a great deal to learn, and she believed now the capacity to learn it. The ceremony was brief. Afterward, in the open space outside the ceremony room, the group dispersed in the organic way of people who had spent weeks in close proximity under pressure and were now navigating the recalibration of returning to ordinary distance. Some people moved immediately toward exit conversations. Some gathered in the small clusters that formed naturally among people who had found each other through the specific chemistry of shared difficulty. Walker moved toward her. She had been half expecting it. He stopped a few feet away and said nothing for a moment, which was unusual for him. Walker had never been at a loss for words. He had an opinion on everything and the confidence to state it. The silence from him now was doing something she recognized. It was the silence of someone searching for the right version of a thing they needed to say. "I put in a request to withdraw the formal complaint," he said finally, "from the official record." She looked at him. When? She asked. The morning after the final exercise, he said. Davis told me the board would see it regardless, so I withdrew it before they convened. He paused. It shouldn't have been filed, not without knowing more than I knew. No, she agreed, it shouldn't have. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to say it's fine. I know it's not entirely fine. It's not, she said, but it's also not permanent. She paused. You made a decision based on what you could see. The problem wasn't your intention. The problem was your assumption that you could see everything relevant. She looked at him steadily. You know that now. That knowledge is going to make you a better officer than you would have been without it, which means it cost something, but it also bought something. He was quiet. How do you do that? He said. Do what? Take something that should make you angry and turn it into something useful, he said. I've been watching you do it for 8 weeks. Every time I gave you a reason to fight back, you didn't. Every time I gave you a reason to collapse, you didn't. Every time I gave you a reason to be bitter, you turned it into something else. He shook his head slightly. I don't know how to do that. She looked at him for a long moment. You've never needed to, she said. You've been winning for your whole career. Winning doesn't teach you how to turn things into something useful. Losing does. Surviving does. Carrying something heavy for a long time and choosing every single day to keep carrying it instead of putting it down that teaches you. She paused. You'll get there. Just takes time and usually something that costs you. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was respect. Not the respect you give someone because their rank demands it. Not the respect you give someone because their record precedes them. The respect you give someone because you have watched them from close range in difficult circumstances and understood that what they are made of is genuinely worth something. Thank you, he said, for not giving up, because if you had given up, I would never have known what I was missing. She said nothing for a moment. Then don't waste it. He nodded. He extended his hand. She shook it. And that was the end of what they had been to each other and the beginning of what they might eventually become. Not friends, not yet, maybe not ever in the traditional sense, but something. Two people who had been on opposite sides of an assessment and had both been changed by the distance between their positions and the work it had taken to close it. He walked away. She watched him go. Cole was standing near the building entrance, watching the event with that particular quality of attention she had come to recognize as the way he watched all things fully without performance, simply present to what was actually happening. She crossed to him. He withdrew the complaint, she said. I know, Cole said. Did you tell him to? Cole looked at her. Would it matter? She thought about it. No, she said. It wouldn't. Then does it matter whether I answer? Oh. She almost smiled again. You're infuriating. I've been told, he said, and something in his voice was warm in a way it rarely was. They stood together for a moment in the mild California morning, watching the ceremony crowd disperse, watching the ordinary end of an 8-week evaluation program that had been for one person in it anything but ordinary. I'm going to Maine, Maya said. Cole turned to look at her. I'm going to go see Whitfield, she said. Before I start on the curriculum, I want to meet the man whose 3 words started all of this. She paused. I want him to know how far they went. Cole was quiet for a moment. His expression did the thing it rarely did. It opened slightly, like a door cracked an inch to show there was light behind it. He'll be glad to hear it, Cole said finally. He always says the not knowing is the hardest part. You do something for someone, and they go back into the world, and you spend years wondering whether it held. Did he know about me before this program? No, Cole said. I write about the work. I write about the approach. I don't name operators. He paused. He knows someone came through the North Range with me last week. He knows the general shape of it. He doesn't know it was you. Will you tell him? Cole looked at her. You could tell him yourself when you go to Maine. She thought about that. James Whitfield, a retired commander in Maine who wrote letters and always wrote back. The first link in a chain that had traveled from his mouth to Cole's chest to a North Range in Coronado to the center of Maya Reynolds' understanding of what she was and what she was still capable of being. 3 words. Trust yourself, Maya. She thought about what she would say to him when she found him. She thought about sitting across from an old man who had once said the right thing to a struggling operator and then sent that operator back into the world and spent years not knowing whether it had held. She would tell him it had held. She would tell him it had held so well that it had been passed forward to someone else, and that someone else had passed it forward again, and that the words were still traveling, still landing, still doing the specific work that only true things could do indefinitely. She would tell him, your 3 words saved my career. But more than that, they saved the next version of me. The one who is going to sit across from young operators who are drowning in something they can't name and help them find the surface. And someday one of those operators is going to find their own Whitfield moment, their own 3 words, and pass them forward again. And your words will be in that. Your words will be in all of it. She hadn't said any of this to Cole yet. She would. But first, she wanted to say it to Whitfield. She looked at Cole. When do you write to him? She asked. What time of year? Anniversary of the exercise that almost ended my career, Cole said. November every year. November, she said. She filed it away. She thought about her own calendar. She thought about the 8 weeks that had just ended and what their anniversary would mean when it came around the date she had arrived with 1 duffel bag and 10 years of memories, or the date of the final exercise, or the date she had sat outside the boardroom with a letter to her sister in her pocket and Cole's voice in her memory and a word written next to 7 decision points. She thought probably it would be the date of the 3 words, because that was the date that divided before from after. A week later, she stood at the North Range one final time before she left the base. It was early. The range was empty. The base was doing what it always did in the hour before full activity began, breathing in that particular way of a place that contained a great deal of stored purpose and was organizing itself to deploy it. She stood at the lane where she and Cole had spent 2 hours on the first morning. The lane where she had first noticed the tightening arriving before it hit. The lane where she had first understood the difference between being ambushed by a storm and seeing it come. She didn't have a weapon. She just stood there. She was doing something she had been practicing lately on Cole's indirect suggestion, and Caroline's much more direct one. She was letting herself be somewhere without performing anything. Just existing in the place. Just acknowledging what had happened there and what she had built there and what she was carrying out of it. The range safety officer appeared from the equipment room. He saw her standing there and slowed. He looked at her with the careful, unassuming assessment of a young man who knew how to read a situation without inserting himself into it unnecessarily. Lieutenant Reynolds, he said. Petty Officer Chotu, she said. A pause. You're leaving today, he said. This afternoon, she said. He nodded. She looked at him. I owe you a thank you, she said. From 3 weeks ago, the water bottle. He looked mildly surprised. That was nothing, ma'am. It wasn't nothing, she said. I was alone out here for 90 minutes doing something hard, and you brought me water and didn't ask any questions and then went back to your post. That was exactly what I needed, and you read it correctly without being told. She paused. That's a skill. Don't underestimate it. Cho looked at her for a moment. I grew up with a father who needed things without being able to ask for them, he said. Taught me to pay attention. She looked at him. He's lucky to have you, she said. I'm lucky to have had him, Cho said. They stood together for a moment in the early morning quiet. 2 people from completely different places in the military structure, sharing the small, genuine moment that happens sometimes between strangers when both of them are being honest. Then Cho nodded and she nodded, and he went back to the equipment room, and she stood at the range for another minute alone. She thought about her father. She thought about Caroline. She thought about what it cost a family to watch someone they loved disappear into the machinery of operational service and come back changed and disappear again and come back changed again, and how that cost was never fully accounted for in any evaluation matrix, and how someday in the curriculum she and Cole were going to build together, she wanted to include a module about that, about the people who held the rope from the other end and pulled even when they couldn't see what they were pulling toward. She turned away from the range. She went to collect her gear. She had a plane to catch. And before the plane, she had one more stop to make. Davis was in his office when she knocked. He looked up from the paperwork that seemed to perpetually occupy the surface of his desk and gestured to the chair across from him, and she sat in it for the last time, the same chair where he had shown her the folder with the word inconsistent 3 times in his own handwriting at the bottom. I wanted to say goodbye properly, she said. He looked at her with that steady, unhurried assessment. You're going to Maine, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Cole told you. Cole tells me what I need to know, Davis said. I'm glad you're going. Whitfield should hear it. She looked at him. You know him, she said. We were in the same program 40 years ago, Davis said. Different world, same range. He paused. He was the best operator I ever trained alongside. When he retired, I wasn't sure the program would know what it lost. He said it plainly without drama the way he said everything. But she heard what was underneath it, the particular grief of watching someone exceptional leave, and the particular comfort of knowing that what they built didn't leave with them. Tell him Davis says the program still feels it, he said. I'll tell him, she said. She stood. She extended her hand. He stood and shook it firm, direct brief, the handshake of a man who said everything he meant and nothing he didn't. Reynolds, he said, Senior Chief. Don't let this be the end of your story, he said. This was one chapter, a hard one, but one. She looked at him. I know, she said, and she did. She walked out of his office, through the corridor, out of the building, into the California morning that was fully itself now warm and clear and indifferent to the particular human drama it had hosted for the past 8 weeks. The way places were always indifferent, the way the significance of a location lived entirely in the people who moved through it. She drove to the airport. On the plane, she opened the curriculum folder and read through it again, the full 12 pages forward and back. She made notes in the margins, small additions, things that had occurred to her in the past week that belonged in the document. A line about small kindnesses, a section about the people on the other end of the rope, a note about the specific language an evaluator should use when they see inconsistency that doesn't fit the expected pattern, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, which were the same number of words and entirely different in what they produced in the person hearing them. She wrote in the margins for 2 hours. By the time the plane began its descent, she had filled 12 pages with her own additions. The curriculum had doubled in size. She thought Cole would be pleased. She thought Whitfield, when she met him, would understand. She thought Caroline would read the whole thing when it was finished and cry again quietly on the phone, the way she cried when something proved true that she had been believing without evidence for a long time. She thought about the operator, the one who didn't exist yet, the one who was somewhere in the future of the SEAL community, carrying something that hadn't happened to them yet, something that would change them in ways they couldn't predict, and would eventually send them into a program or an evaluation or a corridor with an official determination in their folder and a story nobody was asking them to tell. And she thought about what it would mean for that operator to encounter a system that knew what they were carrying and had a language for it and a framework for it and a human being who had lived it standing in front of them saying, I know what this is and I know it's not the end and I know because it happened to me and I am still here. She thought about that operator. She was building the program for that operator. She had once been that operator. The plane landed. She took a taxi to the small town in Maine where James Whitfield lived with his wife, in a house on a road she had looked up the night before because she had wanted to know what the road was called before she drove it. She knocked on the door. A man opened it, older than she'd imagined, but with the quality she recognized immediately, the specific quality of someone who had once operated in hard environments and carried the interior architecture of that experience into every subsequent moment of their life. Not hardness, groundedness. The quality of a person who had been tested completely and had found out who they were. He looked at her. He had never seen her face before. He had no idea who she was. She said, My name is Maya Reynolds. Commander Nathan Cole sent me. Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider. Come in, he said. I've been expecting someone like you. She walked in. She sat across from him at a kitchen table while his wife made coffee without being asked, the way Caroline answered on the second ring without being asked, the way Cho brought water without being asked, the small automatic kindness of people who paid attention. And she told him everything. Not the classified parts, not the operational details, the human parts. And the 8 weeks in the North Range and the word stay in the moment at decision point 7. When the other room reached for her and she named it and stayed and made the call that proved she had never been finished. Whitfield listened without interruption. His wife set coffee on the table and sat in the chair beside him and listened too. When Maya was done, the kitchen was very quiet. Whitfield looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at her. Nathan was the best operator I ever trained with, he said. I told him 3 words and sent him back out into the world and spent 15 years not knowing whether they had been enough. They were more than enough, she said. They traveled 20 years and they're still traveling. He looked at her steadily. And now, he said, now I'm building a program, she said. So the words don't have to wait for someone like Cole to be standing in the right place at the right time. So the system itself knows how to say them. Whitfield was quiet for a long moment. His wife put her hand over his on the table. He looked at Maya Reynolds, this woman he had never met, who had traveled across the country to sit in his kitchen and tell him that something he had done 20 years ago was still reverberating, still doing its work, still finding the people who needed it most. And he said the only thing there was to say. Good, he said. That's good. Maya Reynolds drove away from that house understanding something she had not fully understood before. She had arrived at Coronado believing that her record would speak for her. She had been wrong about that. Records didn't speak. People did. And the most important words she had ever heard were not in any file, any evaluation report, any official determination, any training brief that cited her as an example of exceptional tactical judgment. They were 3 words spoken in a corridor by a man who had received them from a man sitting in a kitchen in Maine who had spent 20 years hoping they were enough. Trust yourself, Maya. She drove. She had a curriculum to finish. She had a program to build. She had operators to find the ones who were carrying things nobody could see, the ones whose hesitations were being measured in evaluation matrices that could not read what was underneath them, the ones who were sitting in equipment bays at 2,200 hours, reassembling weapons with steady hands and unsteady hearts and wondering what was wrong with them. She would find them. She would sit across from them. She would look at them the way Cole had looked at her, not with pity, not with the resigned expression of someone performing the duty of fairness before an inevitable conclusion, but with the clear, grounded recognition of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. And she would say the words. Not just 3 of them, whatever number it took, because that was what the chain was for. That was why Whitfield had spoken, why Cole had listened, why Maya Reynolds had sat on a range in Coronado for 2 hours alone and then been handed water by a young man who paid attention and then walked into a boardroom with her whole career on the line and stayed and made the call. So that the next one wouldn't have to do it alone. She had failed every combat test. She had failed them while fighting a war nobody else could see. And she had won that war not by pretending it wasn't happening, not by performing her way past it, not by outrunning the thing that was chasing her. She had won it by learning to stand still long enough to see it coming and choosing every single time to stay. That was not a small thing. That was the whole thing. That was in the end the only thing that had ever mattered. And it would keep mattering in the training rooms and the evaluation fields and the equipment bays and the corridors outside boardrooms, where other warriors were waiting in the particular silence of people who had done everything within their power and were now sitting in the part that was no longer within their power. It would keep mattering there, in all those places, in all those moments, for as long as Maya Reynolds had breath and voice and the willingness to use them, which was as far as she was concerned for the rest of her life.